The twin suns of Arcalus rose slowly above the crystal towers of the royal city, their golden light touching the palace spires like fire in the sky. The day was no ordinary day, it was the day the princess, Lyria, would choose her future for centuries. The royal family of Arcalus followed an old tradition. When the princess reached her age of choosing, she would call for suitors from across the galaxy. Thousands would come, each eager to prove their worth, each ready to show their strength, their riches, or their strange alien powers. This time was different, for the call had reached farther than ever before. 10,000 suitors had answered. 10,000 warriors, kings, merchants, and nobles now stood outside the palace gates. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see. Ships from distant systems hung above the city like stars in daylight. Some suitors came from worlds made of ice, their bodies glowing with cold light. Others were giants of stone, each step shaking the ground. Many had armor of gold or weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The air was thick with pride and power. But among the sea of aliens stood one figure that looked strangely out of place. He was tall, but not giant. He had no glowing skin, no armor, no crown. His clothes were plain, his eyes calm, his name was Daniel. And he was human. No one noticed him at first. In fact, some who saw him laughed. What chance could a fragile human have against such mighty beings? Inside the palace, Princess Lyria stood before a mirror of crystal. Her long silver hair shimmered like flowing light. Her eyes, bright and deep, held both fear and duty. She had been prepared for this moment since childhood. Her tutors told her she must choose the strongest, the most powerful, the one who could protect the throne. Yet deep inside, her heart longed for something else, something no one spoke of. She wanted not only strength but truth, not only power but kindness. The palace gates opened with a sound like thunder, and the suitors entered the grand hall. Each step echoed against marble floors, the ceiling arched high above. Painted with scenes of ancient battles, the princess sat upon her throne, surrounded by guards in silver armor. Her father, the king, watched with sharp eyes. The first suitors came forward. A warlord with skin of fire raised his hand and flames danced across the hall. A giant from the ice world cracked the marble with his fist. A lord from the star clusters showed jewels worth entire cities. The crowd roared with approval. Each display grew louder, more violent, more proud. But as each alien shouted of glory, Daniel stayed silent. He watched, his hands folded. He did not try to outshine the others. He did not try to prove himself with weapons or riches. His calm gaze rested on the princess, not with hunger or pride, but with quiet respect. Lyria noticed. Though she said nothing, the hours passed, and still the suitors displayed their powers. The princess's face remained unreadable, but inside she felt heavy. None of them spoke words of truth. None of them looked at her as a person. To them, she was a prize, a crown, a treasure to be claimed. At last the hall grew restless. The king whispered to his daughter, urging her to remember her duty, but before she could speak, a strange silence filled the chamber. The suitors turned and their eyes fell on Daniel. He had stepped forward at last, but not to boast. Instead, he helped a young servant who had tripped and spilled water across the floor. His movement was simple, his act small, yet in the silence, it rang louder than the warlord's fire or the giant's strength. Lyria's heart skipped for the first time that day. She saw something real, something honest. It was not power that moved her, it was humanity. The crowd laughed, mocking the human. The warlord sneered, the giant spat on the ground. "Is this your strength, human?" One shouted, "Cleaning floors?" Another laughed, "Go back to your weak little world," but Daniel did not answer. He only gave a small smile to the servant and returned quietly to his place. The mockery washed over him like wind over stone. The princess leaned forward slightly. Her eyes narrowing, suspense filled the hall. None knew why she stared so intently at this human. None could guess what she felt. The day was only beginning. The contest of strength, the trials of wit, and the games of power still waited. Yet in that single moment, a seed had been planted, a seed that would grow and change the fate of all. For among 10,000 suitors, it was the human who caught her eye. And though none could see it yet, the galaxy itself would tremble because of this choice. The morning bells of the palace rang loud, calling all suitors to the royal arena. The grand hall of yesterday was meant for greetings, but today the real trials would begin. Every suitor would show his worth before the eyes of the princess and the council. The galaxy had sent its strongest, its cleverest, its wealthiest, and they were eager to crush any rival. The arena itself was built of white stone that shimmered under the suns. Seats rose in circles high above, filled with nobles, merchants, and soldiers. The common people of Arcalis crowded outside the gates, cheering and shouting, hoping to catch even a glimpse of the events inside. The princess sat at the highest seat, her silver hair flowing in the sunlight. The king sat beside her, his face hard while the queen whispered soft words of caution. The first suitor stepped forward. He was the warlord of the burning plains. His skin glowed red like molten fire. He raised both arms and flames leapt high into the sky. Twisting into the shapes of dragons, the crowd gasped as the heat rolled over them. Scorching the edges of the arena, the warlord bowed deeply. His eyes fixed on the princess, then came the ice giant, his breath a storm of frozen wind. He struck the ground, and from the crack rose a tower of ice. Taller than the palace walls, crystals sparkled like 1,000 stars. The people cheered and clapped. Amazed at such raw strength, another suitor, a prince from the cloud realm, spread his arms and floated into the air. His wings of light shimmered like rainbows. He promised the princess that with him, she would never touch the ground again. They could rule the skies together. Free of chains, one by one, the suitors showed their power. Some brought rare gifts, machines that could bend time, jewels carved from dying suns, weapons that hummed with unseen energy. Others fought beasts dragged into the arena, cutting them down in displays of skill and blood. Each tried to outshine the last, and the air grew thick with noise and arrogance. But Daniel, the human, stood at the edge of the arena, silent. He watched the suitors with calm eyes. He did not join the shouting or the boasting. To many, he looked like a fool, to stand among gods and yet remain still. A merchant laughed loudly, pointing at him. "What will you show us, human? Your soft skin? Your empty hands?" The crowd roared with cruel amusement. Princess Lyria shifted in her seat. Her face gave nothing away, but inside her heart stirred. The suitors were powerful, yes, but none looked at her with respect. They looked at her like a trophy, a prize to be claimed. All except the human. He had not moved. Yet she remembered his act from yesterday, small but honest. The contest grew darker as the hours passed. Two suitors challenged each other to combat. The warlord's fire clashed with the giant's ice. The arena shook with every strike. Guards rushed forward to hold back the destruction. The people screamed, though some cheered at the chaos. Lyria gripped the arms of her throne. She was not impressed. Her eyes drifted once again to Daniel, who remained still. Then, without warning, the master of the trials pointed to the human. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted with laughter. "Step forward." "Human," the master commanded. Daniel walked calmly into the center. His steps were steady, his shoulders straight. "What skill do you bring?" the master asked. "What power will you show to the princess and to the galaxy?" Daniel paused, then shook his head slowly. "I have no powers like theirs," he said in a firm but gentle voice. "I cannot summon fire, I cannot freeze mountains. I cannot give treasures." The crowd laughed louder. Some shouted for him to leave, others called him weak. But Daniel raised his hand, asking for silence. "What I can give," he said, his voice clear, "is something none of them have shown. I can give honesty, I can give loyalty. I can give my life without asking for anything in return." His words hung in the air like quiet thunder. They were simple, yet the arena stilled. The warlord sneered. "Empty words," he growled. "Show us something real," the giant mocked. "What is loyalty to a man who breaks with a single strike?" Daniel turned to them, his eyes calm. "Strength without heart is only destruction," he said. "We saw it already when your battle almost killed the people watching. You fight to be feared, not to protect, if that is what the princess desires." "Then I am not the one." The arena grew quiet. The princess leaned forward, her eyes locked on him. She felt her chest tighten. His words were unlike anything spoken that day. They were not about power, they were about truth. The master of the trials looked to the princess, waiting. The king frowned, anger flashing in his eyes. To him, a weak human was an insult to the throne, but Lyria did not frown. She studied Daniel as if she saw a secret no one else could see. The crowd slowly broke into whispers. Some mocked the human, but others, especially the common people, nodded thoughtfully. They had seen too many lords who ruled with power and cruelty. The human's words touched them in ways fire and ice could not. The contest of power was far from over. More trials would come. Greater dangers would rise, but already, The suitors felt the shift. For the first time, a human had spoken. And the princess had listened. And though 10,000 suitors stood tall, their strength shining like suns, a single human's quiet truth cast a shadow none could ignore. Night had fallen over the palace of Archelaus. The lights of the city glowed like rivers of stars, and the ships of 10,000 suitors shone in the sky like a second constellation. The day of contest had ended, but the palace was far from quiet. Inside the halls, music echoed, feasts were served, and the suitors boasted of their victories. Each alien lord tried to outdo the other in words, just as they had in the arena. Yet Daniel sat apart, his plate was untouched. His eyes wandered across the grand chamber, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had seen enough of the suitors to know their hearts. They loved power, not people. They loved the throne, not the princess. And though he felt small among them, he also felt certain. Power alone was not what the princess needed. As the night deepened, the palace trembled with sudden noise. A scream rang out, sharp and terrified. The music stopped. The boasting voices fell silent. All heads turned toward the western corridor. A young alien child, no older than 7, ran into the hall, her face pale with fear. Behind her, smoke rose, the scent of fire filling the air. The guards rushed forward, but the suitors stayed in their seats. Some frowned, others waved their hands as if the matter was beneath them. The warlord laughed. "It is only a servant's child. Not worth our time," the ice giant shrugged. "If the palace burns, they will rebuild it. I will not risk my strength for nothing." Their words were cold, their eyes empty, but Daniel rose without hesitation. He ran past the guards, his steps quick and steady. The corridor beyond was filled with smoke. Flames licked the walls, sparks rained from the ceiling. The child's cries echoed through the choking air. Daniel pressed a cloth over his mouth and pushed forward. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. He found them in a storage room, 3 children trapped by a fallen beam. The fire crackled closer. The heat burned his skin. The children coughed, their small hands reaching for help. Daniel knelt beside the beam. It was heavy, far heavier than anything he had ever lifted. His muscles screamed, his back trembled, but he refused to let go. Inch by inch, he dragged it aside, the flames creeping closer with every breath. At last the beam shifted, the children stumbled free. Daniel lifted the smallest into his arms and guided the others out. His legs shook, his lungs ached, but he did not stop. Smoke filled his vision. Fire roared around him, and for a moment he feared he would not make it. Yet when he stumbled into the main hall again, the children clung to him alive. The crowd gasped. The princess rose to her feet, her eyes wide. The warlord fell silent. The giant lowered his gaze. For all their strength and power, not one of them had moved. Not one had lifted a finger. And yet the fragile human had risked everything. Not for glory, not for the throne, but for children no one else cared about. Daniel set the children down gently, brushing the ash from their faces. He said no words of pride. He did not look to the princess for reward. Instead, he turned to the guards. "Make sure they are safe," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse from smoke, his face streaked with soot. Then he stepped back into the shadows, as if nothing had happened, but Lyria could not look away. Her heart pounded in her chest. All day she had watched suitors boast, fight, and display their strength. Yet none of them had shown this courage without expectation, this kindness without reward. She felt her throat tighten. She knew her people had always spoken of humans as fragile, weak, unworthy. But tonight she saw something none of the others could match. The suitors whispered uneasily among themselves. Some mocked him still, saying it was luck. Others grew jealous, fearing the effect of his actions on the princess. The warlord muttered darkly, "If this human thinks he can win by playing hero, he will learn the cost." The giant nodded, his eyes cold. Plans of rivalry began to stir in the shadows. But Daniel cared nothing for their words. He returned to his seat quietly. His clothes singed, his hands scraped. He asked for no attention, and when food was offered again, he simply shook his head. His only thought was of the children now safe with their families. The night ended with unease. The suitors returned to their ships. The nobles whispered in corners, and the council grew restless. But the princess lay awake in her chamber, her thoughts filled with the image of the human standing in the fire, carrying the children out with steady arms. She whispered to herself, among 10,000 suitors, only one remembered the weak. Her hand pressed against her chest, where her heart beat faster than it should. Suspense curled around her like a storm. She did not know what the next trial would bring, but she knew this. Her eyes would never look at Daniel the same way again. And while the galaxy slept in the quiet halls of the palace, destiny began to shift not with fire or ice, but with the quiet deed of a single human. The palace of Arcalus was never truly quiet, even in the deepest hours of night. Its corridors hummed with the footsteps of guards, the whispers of servants, and the distant hum of ships hanging in orbit. Yet in those days of the choosing, the silence held something heavier. It was not only expectation that filled the air, but also danger, a danger hidden in shadows. Princess Lyria felt it most strongly. She sat by her balcony window, the silver light of the moons falling across her face. Her thoughts drifted again and again to the human Daniel. She could not push away the image of him stepping into the fire to save the children. His act was simple, yet it weighed more in her heart than all the treasures and powers shown by the other suitors. But not everyone shared her feelings in the lower halls. Far from the eyes of the throne, whispers grew louder. Several suitors had gathered in secret chambers. Their faces glowed in the dim light, filled with envy and rage. The warlord's eyes burned like coals. The ice giant's fists clenched. Others leaned close, their voices sharp. "This human shames us," the warlord hissed. The princess looks at him as if he were something more than a weak creature. "If we allow this, our names will be mocked across the stars. He has no power," another said. "But his small deeds charm the people. They whisper of his courage already. If the princess dares to choose him, what will we become? Fools laughed at by every world." The warlord's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "Then we will not allow him to remain." His voice dropped low, filled with threat. "Accidents happen in the palace. Smoke, fire, blades in the dark. No one will blame us, and the human will disappear." The others nodded, jealousy binding them together. They planned in silence, not knowing that beyond the walls, another pair of ears had heard their plot, Daniel himself. He had wandered the corridors unable to sleep. His steps led him near the chamber where the voices hissed. At first he meant to turn away, but the mention of his name froze him. He pressed against the wall, listening, his heart beat fast. But his face stayed calm. When the meeting ended, he returned quietly to his quarters. He said nothing, but his eyes were sharper than before. The next morning, the palace prepared for the next trial. The suitors gathered once more, showing off jewels, weapons, and banners of power. The council watched carefully, the king's gaze cold, the queen's face unreadable. Princess Lyria sat straight upon her throne, but her mind was heavy. Her thoughts kept circling back to the unease she felt. As though danger lurked close, Daniel noticed it too. He saw the way the warlord's eyes lingered on him, the way the giant's mouth curved into a secret smile. He felt the trap tightening, yet he did not show fear. Instead, he watched carefully. His every sense awake, the trial began. This time it was a contest of wisdom. Questions of ruling, puzzles of justice, problems of trade and diplomacy. The suitors answered with pride. Some spoke of crushing rivals with armies. Others promised to tax the weak and grow richer. The warlord's answers dripped with cruelty. The giant's words were cold as stone. When Daniel's turn came, he spoke softly. "A throne is not built to be feared, but to be trusted. A ruler who rules by cruelty will one day stand alone. A ruler who rules by fairness will stand forever with their people." His words stirred murmurs in the crowd. Simple yet powerful, but as the trial ended, and the crowd's attention turned, danger moved unseen. A servant carrying a tray walked near Daniel. Too close, his eyes sharp, his hand reaching for a hidden blade. In the noise of the hall, no one noticed, no one except Daniel. In an instant, Daniel shifted, catching the man's wrist before the blade could strike. The tray clattered to the floor, food spilling across the stone. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned. The servant snarled, his disguise breaking, and from his other sleeve another knife slipped free. The guards rushed, but Daniel was quicker. He twisted the man's wrist, the knife falling with a clang. With calm strength, he held him until the soldiers seized him. The crowd erupted in shock. The princess's eyes widened, her breath caught in her chest. The assassin spat on the ground. "The human should not live," he growled before the guards dragged him away. His words chilled the hall, for they revealed the truth. This was not chance. This was planned. The warlord and the giant sat stiff, their faces hard to read, but Daniel saw the flicker of guilt in their eyes. He said nothing, but he knew, and perhaps the princess knew as well. Her gaze swept the suitors, cold and sharp, lingering only a moment longer on Daniel. The king's face darkened, anger in his eyes, but the queen's hand touched his arm, calming him. "Let the trials continue," she whispered. Yet her voice trembled, for she too felt the shift that night. The palace carried the weight of fear. Guards doubled their patrols. Whispers of betrayal spread like smoke. The suitors grew restless, some plotting, others hiding their unease. The princess sat once more by her balcony, her heart heavy. Yet when she thought of the day, only one image burned in her mind: the human, standing calm as he caught the assassin's blade. She whispered to herself, "He sees what others do not. He protects without command." And though she did not yet speak it aloud, she felt the truth growing inside her heart. The hidden threat had revealed itself, and it had failed. But in its failure, it had shown the galaxy something far greater, that among 10,000 suitors, it was the human alone who stood watchful in the shadows. The sun rose once more over Arcalis, painting the palace towers in shades of gold and fire. Yet inside the royal halls, the mood was not light. The failed attempt on Daniel's life had unsettled everyone. Guards walked with sharper eyes, servants moved nervously, and whispers filled the air like shadows. The king grew more impatient, the queen worried in silence, and the council pressed harder for the princess to decide. 10,000 suitors had come, and 10,000 had shown their wealth, their power or their cunning. Still, the princess had chosen no one. Her heart carried a weight she could not share. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel standing calm before flames, standing steady against the assassin's knife. She told herself it was foolish, that a princess could not give her heart to a fragile human. Yet her heart did not listen that morning. The council declared a new trial, not of strength or wisdom, but of devotion. They demanded that each suitor speak directly to the princess, not with gifts, not with power, but with words. They wished to see whose heart could sway her, and whose promises would carry weight. The warlord stepped forward first. His voice was loud, his tone commanding. "Princess Lyria," he thundered, "with me you will hold an empire of fire. Worlds will bow at your feet. Enemies will tremble at your name. No one will dare defy you. Choose me, and I will make you feared across the stars." The crowd roared, but the princess's eyes remained still. Next came the ice giant. His words were cold and sharp. "With me you will rule with strength unbroken. We will outlast all storms. We will build a legacy carved in stone, eternal and unyielding. No weakness will ever touch you. No heart will ever soften you. With me you will be untouchable." The nobles nodded, impressed by his certainty, but the princess's heart grew heavier. One after another suitors spoke. Some promised riches beyond imagination. Others swore loyalty, but with eyes filled with greed. Their words were heavy with pride, thick with hunger, yet none spoke of her as a person. None saw her as more than a throne. Finally, Daniel was called forward. He walked to the center with calm steps. His clothes were plain compared to the jewels and armor of the others. His voice was steady but quiet, and yet the hall fell into silence. "Princess," he said, bowing his head with respect, "I cannot promise you empires. For they rise and fall. I cannot promise treasures. For they shine for a moment then turn to dust. I cannot promise you fear. For fear dies the day someone braver stands against it." He lifted his eyes, and they met hers. "What I can promise you is this. If you are in danger, I will stand before you. If you are in sorrow, I will walk beside you. If you are alone, I will stay until the silence is gone. My hands may be empty, but my heart is yours. If you choose it." The hall was silent. Some mocked softly under their breath, but others, even nobles, felt their chests tighten, for his words carried no boast, no demand. They were simple, but they rang with truth. The princess felt her breath catch. Her fingers trembled on the arm of her throne. In that moment, the noise of the hall faded. She heard only his voice. She saw only his eyes. Her heart pounded faster than it ever had. She wanted to speak, to answer. But duty chained her tongue. The king rose, his face dark. "These are the words of weakness," he declared. "A throne is not for love, it is for power. A ruler cannot survive on promises of heart." His words thundered through the hall. Many nodded, but Lyria's eyes dropped to the floor. Torn between the chains of duty and the pull of her heart, that night in her chambers she found no rest. The words of the warlord and the giant echoed, but they felt heavy and cold. Daniel's words, soft as they were, refused to leave her mind. They burned brighter than flame. Colder than ice, they felt alive in her private garden. She found Daniel walking alone under the starlight. He bowed politely, ready to step away. But she stopped him. For the first time, she spoke to him without guards, without the council, without the eyes of the galaxy watching. "Why do you risk yourself?" she asked, her voice soft. "You could leave. You could return to your people. Why stay among those who mock you, among those who wish you dead?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because I saw you, not the crown, not the throne, you, and I could not walk away." Her heart trembled at his words. Tears pricked her eyes, but she hid them quickly. She turned away, whispering, "The council will never allow it." "Then let them hate me," Daniel answered, his voice firm. "My worth is not theirs to measure." She looked back at him, and in that moment she knew her heart had chosen, though her lips had not yet spoken it aloud. The trial of devotion was meant to reveal who could win the princess's heart. Instead, it revealed something greater. It showed her that her heart had already been taken, not by the strongest, not by the richest, but by the human who stood quietly when others roared. And as the stars burned above them, she knew the hardest trial was yet to come, the trial of choice. The day of decision arrived. The city of Arcalis swelled with life as crowds gathered near the palace walls. From every corner of the empire, citizens had come to witness the moment when Princess Lyraya would name her chosen suitor. The skies above glimmered with ships, their lights forming rivers of stars. The great arena had been prepared for this day, filled with banners, music, and the thunder of voices inside the palace. The tension was heavier than stone, the council whispered among themselves. The queen sat silently with worry in her eyes. The king's face was sharp as a blade. His patience had thinned to nothing. He demanded that his daughter choose power, strength, and a partner worthy of the throne. Princess Lyraya dressed in robes of white and silver, her hair braided with jewels that caught the light. Yet her heart beat not with joy but with storm. She knew what was expected of her, but she also knew what her soul had already chosen. She carried Daniel's words inside her like fire. She could not silence them, not even now. The 10,000 suitors gathered in the arena. They stood in rows, their weapons and crowns flashing, their bodies towering and proud. The warlord with his burning skin, the ice giant with his cold glare, the prince of clouds with his wings of light, each one certain of victory, each one waiting to claim the throne. At the edge stood Daniel, the human, plain among giants, his clothes simple, his stance calm. He did not step forward, he did not shout or boast. He simply waited, his heart steady, he had no illusions. He knew the council would never want him. He knew the king despised him. Yet he also knew the princess had looked at him in a way she had looked at no other. And that was enough. The trumpet sounded. The king rose from his seat. His voice rolled across the arena. "Today my daughter, Princess Lyraya, will choose her partner and the future ruler of Arcalis. Let all listen and let all obey." The princess stood slowly. Her hands trembled, but her face was calm. Her gaze swept across the sea of suitors. One by one she saw their pride, their hunger, their arrogance, and her heart grew heavier. Then her eyes found Daniel, and in that moment her fear turned to strength. She raised her hand. The arena grew silent. Thousands leaned forward. The warlord smiled. The giant lifted his chin. The prince spread his wings, each one certain that her hand would fall on them. But her voice rang clear, strong as the suns above. "I choose the human." For a heartbeat, silence ruled the arena. No one breathed, no one moved, then the roar came. 10,000 voices cried out in shock and rage. The warlord's flames burst high. The giant slammed his fist into the ground. The prince's wings flared with fury. "Impossible!" they shouted. "Unacceptable!" The king rose in fury, his voice thundering. "This is madness! A human is weak, unworthy of the throne. He cannot protect you, he cannot rule you, shame your bloodline." But the princess did not flinch. Her eyes burned with a fire no suitor could match. "Strength without heart is nothing," she declared. "Riches without truth are dust. Power without kindness destroys all it touches. He alone showed me courage without demand, loyalty without chains. He alone saw me not as a throne, but as a person. And that is why I choose him," the people in the seats whispered. And slowly voices rose, not all were angry. Many common folk cheered, they had seen Daniel's deeds. They remembered the fire, the children he saved, the assassin he stopped. They remembered his words. And in their hearts they knew he was different. They began to chant his name softly, then louder until it spread like a tide. The suitors grew restless. The warlord stepped forward, flames burning around him. "I will not be mocked by a weak creature," he roared. The ice giant slammed the ground. "This insult will not stand." Guards rushed forward, weapons raised, but Daniel stepped calmly into the center of the arena. He looked at the warlord and the giant without fear. His voice was steady. "If your strength is so fragile that the choice of one woman shatters it, then perhaps you were never strong at all," the warlord growled. His fire dimming, the giant's fist lowered, for though they hated his words, they could not deny them. The king's face was hard as stone, but the queen leaned close, her voice quiet. "Listen to the people. They cheer him already. The more you fight this, the more they will stand with him." The king's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. The princess walked down from her throne. She stood beside Daniel, her hand slipping into his. The sight made the arena gasp. Never had royalty touched a suitor before the final blessing. But she did not care, her heart was no longer hidden. Together they faced the roaring crowd, the furious suitors and the disapproving king. Yet they stood unbroken. Hand in hand, in that moment, the galaxy shifted. For love had defied power, heart had defied fear, and though battles would come, though storms would rise, the choice had been made. The human had been chosen, and no force in the stars could change it. The arena was still trembling from the princess's choice. 10,000 suitors stood in shock, their pride shattered like glass. The crowd's voices rose and fell like waves. Some shouted in anger, some laughed in disbelief. But more and more began to cheer, for they had seen what others ignored. They had seen the human's courage, his honesty, his heart. Daniel stood quietly beside Princess Lyria, her hand warm in his. His clothes were plain, his stance simple, yet in that moment he seemed taller than any warlord or prince. He did not smile, for he knew the storm was not over. The suitors would not forget this insult, and the king's face burned with rage. The warlord stepped forward, flames burning across his skin. "This is a disgrace," he roared. "We will not bow to a weakling. We will tear down this farce and take the throne by force." His words were met with growls from other suitors. Some raised their weapons, some shouted their refusal. The air shook with the promise of violence. The guards raised their spears, the nobles gasped. The queen clutched her chest. But before chaos could break, Daniel stepped forward. He raised his hand, his voice calm. "If any of you wish to fight, then fight me alone." The warlord laughed, fire spitting from his mouth. "You? A human? You cannot stand against me. I could crush you in a single breath." Daniel's voice did not waver. "Perhaps you could, but if you strike me, the galaxy will see what you are, not strong, but cruel. You call yourselves rulers, yet you fear the choice of one woman. If your power needs blood to prove itself, then your power is nothing." The words cut deeper than any blade. The suitors shifted uneasily. Their pride burned, but they could not answer. For the people were listening. The chants for Daniel grew louder, filling the arena like thunder. The human, the human, the human, the warlord's fire dimmed, his face twisting with hate, but he could not act, not with thousands of eyes upon him. Slowly, one by one, the suitors turned away, their threats fading into mutters, their arrogance broken. They left the arena in shame, their ships lifting into the sky like shadows fleeing the dawn. Silence followed, heavy and strange. The king stood from his throne, his fists clenched, his voice thundered. "This is not what I wished, this is not what I planned." A human cannot sit on the throne of Archelaus. But the queen placed her hand on his arm, her voice steady. "You did not plan it. But the people saw, they saw his courage, his truth. If you deny this choice, you will not only fight your daughter, you will fight your people." The king's jaw tightened. His pride fought against reason, yet the sound of the people chanting grew louder. Louder still, he looked down at the human standing unbroken, at his daughter standing beside him, and he knew the tide could not be turned, with heavy anger in his heart. The king raised his hand. "So be it," he declared. "By the will of the princess and by the will of the people, the human shall stand beside her, may the crown rest upon their heads." The arena erupted. Some voices roared in rage, but more voices cheered. The sound rolled across the city like thunder, echoing through every tower, every street. The people of Archelaus had found a story greater than power, greater than fear. The coronation was held that very evening. In the grand hall of crystal, Princess Lyria stood with Daniel at her side. The crown of Archelaus gleamed in the hands of the high priest. Slowly, he placed it upon her head. The people cheered. Then he turned to Daniel. His crown was simpler, smaller, but when it touched his head, the hall shook with voices. Long live the human, long live the queen. Long live the truth, Daniel bowed his head. Humble as ever, he did not feel like a king, but when he looked at Lyria, and she smiled at him with eyes full of trust, he knew his path was clear. He was not chosen for strength, not for wealth, but for heart, and he would never betray that gift. Days turned to weeks. The suitors who left spread tales of disgrace. Some swore vengeance, some plotted revenge, but within Arcalis a new hope grew. The people spoke of their rulers not with fear, but with pride. They told the story of the human who saved children from fire, who stopped an assassin, who stood against 10,000 suitors with nothing but honesty. And the story spread beyond the planet. Across stars, across empires, Daniel did not change who he was. He walked among the people, listened to their worries, helped with their burdens. The nobles frowned, but the common folk loved him. They saw in him a ruler unlike any before, one who remembered the weak, one who saw them as people, not as tools. Princess Lyria ruled with wisdom, her hand steady, her voice clear. Beside her, Daniel gave her strength not by commanding armies, but by reminding her always of the truth. Together they built a throne not of fear, but of trust, not of chains, but of heart. And though storms still waited in the shadows, though enemies plotted in distant worlds, the galaxy could not ignore what had begun. Among 10,000 suitors, it was the human who had been chosen. Among 10,000 crowns of power, it was the crown of heart that prevailed. And so the story of Daniel and Lyria was carried across the stars, a story that whispered the truth of humanity, that its greatest strength was never fire, never stone, never riches, but the courage to care, even when no one else would.